Welcome to Let's Talk Episode 1. This will be the first episode in an ongoing series about the technology and art of photography, as well as about the House of Nyght Falcon. So, let's get started. What are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about a project called West End in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We're going to start at the 5,000 foot level, and then we're going to focus on specific challenges. So what do we mean by the 5,000 foot level? Every project requires an overview. Every project requires, as you'll see, some basic elements if we're going to successfully accomplish and meet the goals of our clients. So some of those challenges are logistics. What's involved in the art of logistics? Well, believe it or not, it starts with how we pack the car. We need to make sure that every aspect of the job, all of its requirements, will be met before we leave. So typically, that means that for a shoot that will start locally at 9 a.m., we're packing the car at 6 a.m. We have a complete list of all the equipment that's required, including memory cards which have been formatted. Everything, every aspect of what's required to complete that job must be in place before we leave. In addition to logistics, planning. In this case, we primarily talk about the walkthrough that we do at the beginning of every job. The point of the walkthrough is to develop a sequence by which we're going to complete photographing, in this case the architectural and construction aspects of the job, in a very effective and time-efficient way. In terms of execution, we want to make sure that we follow every aspect of the sequence that we develop as we walk through the property. We talk a lot about ritual. Ritual is absolutely critically important. Ritual is doing the same thing the same way. All the time. Ritual allows us to develop consistency. Consistency helps us avoid mistakes. As I said, we don't want to show up at a job, whether it's local or 500 miles away, and be missing a key piece of gear or find out that we left memory cards behind. Some mistakes cannot be forgiven or overcome in the field. In addition to genuine consistency in how we execute the task, the Nyght Falcon look and feel is a function of a ritual that we use in post-processing that guides us through taking a raw image and delivering a JPEG to our client. So what are some of the challenges that we face? I can't underestimate the importance of the challenges that we face as a consequence of environment. For example, what direction does the building face? If the building faces south, it means that a significant portion of the building will face north, and that it will generally be either black or left heavily in shadows. That creates a situation where, when we photograph the north side of the building, it will be backlit. That is a tremendous problem to compensate for, and requires that we make a number of changes in how we configure the camera prior to taking that image. In addition to the direction the building is facing, believe it or not, every surface reflects light. If you can see it, then under certain circumstances, it will reflect light. We're going to come back and talk more about this momentarily. We don't often we don't often get the opportunity to photograph a building without people around. So our people skills, particularly if it's an office or an apartment complex, how do we ask someone politely to leave a common area without offending that person so that we can complete the job at hand? Not an easy task. We also have to learn how to ask the right questions, because not all of our clients understand either the complexity of what we do or what we need specifically to know to execute the task successfully. I can't underestimate the degree to which photography is extremely physical. Our Pentax 645Z is huge, heavy, and when you put a 25mm lens on it, just carrying the camera around for 8 hours can be exhausting. That's before we get to moving equipment, taking the lights down, putting the lights back together. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's exhausting. And finally, we're going to focus in some parts of this presentation on the technical aspects of what we do, why they're complex, and how we compensate for technical problems in the field. So having said that, let's get started. Photography is all about understanding and using light. We're going to talk about various aspects of the use of light. We're going to begin with the concept of interpolation. Can you believe what you see? Is this a trick question? No. But I will tell you, no, you can't trust it. For example, today is the 27th of July. It's roughly 90 degrees and it is extremely humid. I've been conditioned to think of the sky as always being blue. But I can absolutely promise you that as we get towards 2, the high point of the day here, the sky is going to be fading significantly to gray. And if I don't take that into account, my images are not going to look good. Interpolation applies to every aspect of what we do all the time. We have to be able to look at a scene and understand not only how we see it, but how the camera sees it. Because if we can't do that, then we can't render an image that looks real, or that meets our expectations about what that image should look like. Let's talk about some of the key aspects of light. The first is the volume of light. We have been conditioned to think about light in a very specific way. Going back to my black whiteboard, for us, particularly growing up in the West, we think about light as a beam. So when I fire my flashlight, I think about the light coming out in a very consistent fashion. Straightforward, tightly knit, and that is wrong. From the moment I fire my flashlight, the light is diffusing, being broken apart. It may, under some situations, remain fairly consistent in the center of the cone. But as I move to the edges of the cone, the light becomes increasingly diffuse I also have to keep in mind that every time light strikes an object, it's going to reflect. When the light comes back in my face, so to speak, or when the light comes directly back in the same direction from which it is fired, this is the point at which I'm going to get a reflection. And believe it or not, even a clear piece of glass can and will become a highly reflective surface. The angle of light is absolutely critical as well. So light reflects at the complement of the angle with which it strikes an object. So if I fire light at an object at 45 degrees, it's going to reflect at 135. And if we think about what we've already said, then every part of the beam of light coming from my strobes or my camera flash is going to be hitting that wall at different angles. If one of those, this one in particular, comes directly back at me, I'm going to get a reflection. So wherever I place my strobes, I need to understand specifically how that light is going to reflect through the space. The other thing I want to mention at this point is that light can be broken. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it in fact does happen. As these arrows indicate, every time light strikes another photon of light, the light can be split. When we do this in a fashion that renders the volume of light consistent, then we're going to get perfect color and no reflections. Can we always do that? No, but we can try. And our lighting methodology is designed specifically to try to promote this. So let's go back to our presentation and look at the next aspect of light. The law of inverse square. The law of inverse square says that light reflects, or light's intensity diminishes, at the inverse of the square of my distance from the object. That means that if I am 4 feet away, 4 square is 16. The inverse of that, I have 1/16 the amount of light required to complete the job. That becomes critically important if I expect to accurately complete the process of lighting the room absolutely consistently. I can't have some areas that are hot, that is to say, extremely bright, and others which are extremely dark. And in a minute, when we talk about color, you're going to see why this makes sense. So let's head back to the presentation, clear our canvas. And finally, let's understand color. So, the human eye sees something like 16.7 million colors. The sensor in your digital camera sees only black and white. Color is derived from that black and white by the image processor in the camera. The key to how well that image processor derives the color is obviously partially the design of the image processor, but it's also about the relationship between black and white. So when black and white are one f-stop apart, I'm going to get as close to perfect color rendering as I can. I'm going to get the best detail, texture, contrast, and the best emotional experience. When the difference between black and white is 2 f-stops, it's okay. 3, no. 4, wow, we have a problem. In most cases, when we're working in the field, it's between 3 and 4. We rarely get to 1. We typically are somewhere around 2. So we're constantly lighting the scene in an attempt to get as much information to the image processor by keeping black and white as close together as we can. And in a minute, when we look at an image, hopefully this will make more sense. So let's head back. We are in debt to Gabriel Lippmann. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1908, essentially for the diagram you're looking at here. He had also developed a very early form of color photography that, while perfect, was not typically practical. If you look at this diagram, you'll notice that the blue, the green, and the red periodically peak and trough together. When they do that, the volume of light in the room is absolutely consistent. Our goal when we light a room is to make sure that the light is as close to consistent as we possibly can. When the light is consistent, the difference between black and white is 1 f-stop or less. Can we do it? Not always, but that is our goal. So let's go back and let's look at where we are. This is a real scene. This is West End. This is close to a finished object or photograph. I want you to notice how many reflective surfaces there are. In this case, we can actually see reflections of lights from the granite countertop back to the window. Stainless steel is always a problem. You can see another reflection of a light here off the floor and back up. And you can see the reflection of track lights here, essentially hitting the granite, hitting the window, and reflecting. Also of concern are these lighter areas of the floor, because it's going to be very easy to lose them if we're not careful about how we light the scene. This is an early version, actually one of the raw images to which only minor work has been done. You can see clearly the reflection of our strobes. You can see how the windows are washed out. The colors are highly muted. Notice the reflections here as well. And while there's more detail on the floor there, the detail on the floor there is very bad. Lots of reflective surfaces in the granite. Ultimately, this image required moving our strobes in such a way that the light came across the scene, and we tried to break all of the light directly over the countertop. So how do we know? Well, the answer is we do and we don't. We have very specific ways of working. We'll talk about that now. So, for example, one of the first questions is, in the scene, what is the difference between black and white? And typically, as I said, it's 3 or 4. Where is the blackest black? Where is the whitest white? And ultimately, where are my reflective surfaces? We study each scene before we take a single photograph to make sure that we understand where all those surfaces are likely to be. When we've answered all of these questions, this typically will determine how we're going to set up our lights. Can we get every reflective surface every time? No. In many cases, it will take several attempts. We can analyze and analyze and analyze and analyze, but experience teaches us that there's always something unexpected that's likely to occur. And as a consequence, we may likely have to reshoot the scene again. We discovered in a shoot a long time ago that simply turning on a lamp completely changed the camera's perception of color. I can't emphasize this enough. We talked about ritual earlier, but ritual itself is not sufficient unless it becomes a methodology, and a methodology is a way of practicing ritual. We analyzed the same process. We applied the same process to every shoot, to everything we're working with, even when we do portraits. It's the same series of questions. It's the same way of lighting a scene. And that ultimately enables us to solve extremely complex problems pretty quickly. So, in addition to understanding the nature of light, if we apply rituals successfully, repeatedly, then we're able to solve our problems. And in the end, we're able to deliver emotionally powerful images. Before we begin to sum things up, I want to make it clear that a photograph is a visual invitation. to an emotional experience. And the key to being able to deliver that invitation is understanding the technology of the camera, the technology of behind successfully writing a scene, and in addition to lighting a scene, the ability to reproduce that in a working methodology each and every time. So, in summary, light plus emotion is photography. I want to thank you for spending your time with me today. My name is Falcon, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day, and thanks for talking with me.